Hello class, happy week 8. So this week we are entering into the world of hypothesis testing. So a couple key terms and concepts you probably should need to understand is what our hypotheses are, how they're notated. So we have a null hypothesis, which is always designated by an HO. And null basically means no. Okay, in the case of group differences, it would be there's no difference between, say, a pre-test and a post-test, or there's no difference between males or females. And then we have our alternative hypothesis, also known as HA, and that's usually what we want to happen. So a exercise plan causes a decrease in weight, or a particular pharmaceutical causes a reduction in symptoms, or you do something that increases a behavior, whether it's, I don't know, a type of therapy to make for depression, to make you feel better, those sorts of things. So no difference, alternative, what you want to happen. Now, typically, there's a direction implied in our alternative hypothesis, okay? And that direction could be positive or negative. And that has implications on what we call the tails of our distribution. So there's one and two-tailed tests, okay? And a one-tailed test could either be left, meaning you're looking for something negative or reduction to happen, or it could be a positive thing. It's still a one-tailed test, you want something to increase, or there's some sort of benefit. A two-tailed test, which is more commonly what you see, is you're open to whatever the findings are of your study or experiment. So you're looking at both things that could happen negatively or positively. And mathematically, it's kind of a smarter thing to do. It's kind of like a 2-for-1. So to have directional statistical tests that are either left tail or right tail, you really don't see too often. But for the sake of understanding what they are included in our reading and on our homework assignment. So, and with that, those statistical tests, we're going to be doing some t-tests, okay? There's a paired sample, okay? And something you should always know what a paired sample is. Your data needs to be lined up, usually one row, and there's usually like a pre-test or a post-test. There's 2 records for every one individual or subject or entity in the file. And so you're comparing the difference between that pair. In the research world, that's called a repeated measures design. And then once you run your statistic, we have our p-value, or probability, and that's usually associated with the, what you'll see, 0.05 or 0.01 or 0.10. And so that's like your threshold that you're willing to accept or reject the null hypothesis. So, and with hypothesis testing, you're always trying to rule out the null, because that's a given. The null hypothesis is basically nothing happens, there's no change, it's a given in anything research related or in life in general. You can assume nothing. That's basically all that is. And so you want to look at your p-value, determine if your stats come out in your favor, and that's usually the easiest thing to do, but that p-value is also tied to a comparison of the calculated statistic, whether it's a t or f statistic, and if it's less than the critical value, you can reject that null. And then 2 other things you should be aware of. We have this concept of types of error. There's type 1 error, okay, and that's when your null hypothesis is incorrectly assumed to be true. We call that a false positive. And then we have our type 2 error, in which our null hypothesis is falsely rejected, and we call that a false negative. That's just a reality of things that happen in the real world and statistically as well. So. And then that's it. So when there's one other concept you should be aware of, and that's the Z distribution, and that's always tied to when we're testing a difference in proportions. I don't need to get into the specifics, but it's not a T distribution, it's not an F distribution, it's a Z distribution. as associated with testing the differences in proportions. So that is it. This past week went pretty well. I hope all is well with you all. We are really flying through this course. After this week, we really only have like 3 weeks and then the final. And I'll give you more information about that critical article review. Not my favorite assignment, but we have to do it apparently. So if you want to start thinking about that and asking me any questions, be my guest. All right, that's it. Let's have a great week, and I'll see you later.